Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. This video is about Numbers 12. It's about Moses and Aaron and Miriam. It's titled Miriam and Aaron Oppose Moses. And in their own way, they say salvation must be from the Jews. That's part of what this chapter is about. It's in the Old Testament, and in their own way, they're saying that salvation must magically be from the Jews. Let's see how this goes here. Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite, right? And these people are thinking, hey, salvation must be from the Jews. Moses is too important to choose a Cushite wife, just like they're arguing by their actions that God is too important to choose a Cushite Christ, so to speak, right? And I say Cushite, I don't mean Ethiopian. I mean a certain type of black African person. And that's what it's really referring to, because again, Ethiopia is a place. There's many different types of people there. And so they didn't make the distinction between a West African who was in Ethiopia and an Ethiopian. They just knew that some black people went beyond others. Pretty straightforward. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses, they asked? Hasn't he also spoken through us? And the Lord heard this. Now Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone on the face of the earth. And once the Lord said to Moses and Aaron and Miriam, come out of the tent of meeting, all three of you. So the three of them went out. So they were in a spiritual state where they're meeting with God, a tent of meeting. And so he's calling them out of that to a place that's impure for them to be punished. Okay? Now, when it says he's calling them out, it's by his actions, right? It automatically happened. God didn't say, come out of here. Okay, that's just saying that in the story. And there's a lot of examples of figurative speech in the Bible, especially in the New Testament, where they spelled out for you to a T. It says, by this he meant this. By, springs of water, he meant the Spirit. By the temple, okay, he meant his body, and there's layers of figurative talk sometimes, and so on and so forth. And the Lord came down in a pillar of a cloud. He stood at the entrance of the tent and summoned Aaron and Miriam. When the two of them stepped forward, he said, listen to my words. When there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, reveal myself to them in visions. Think martial art visions and visions, straightforward vision, wisdom first and foremost. Think correction and instruction as well. I speak to them in dreams, but this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. Let's stop here for a second. So he's chastising, right? Like I'm going to stop right here and chastise the LGBT community for changing my voice, right? There's whites and Jewish and LGBT supremacists, and they're not very manly. They don't have a lot of heart. When you're a man, you don't do what they're doing. They're some kind of feeble person by default. They're retard. A lot of English people are like that, They're feeble. They're kind of retarded. Look at the expression on Jacob Rothschild's face, King Charles. Look at Harry and William. They don't really have the heart to do what's right. They're just propaganda puppets, right? Very feeble people, very feeble. We see in Pike's book, Morals and Dogma, in Freemasonry, it says the Luciferian light blinds those who are feeble and selfish. So these people are too feeble and selfish to be a man and to admit what they've done, to stop persecuting me. That's why they changed the sound of my voice to make it so it sounds gayish. And so let that be a sign of their failure and why I'm going to punish them and their children forever to the extreme. Can you imagine being those disgraced fools right about now? Can you imagine being a rich fool at this point in 2026, utterly disgraced? Everyone with sense blaming them for the problems of the world, and for good reason. Thank God I'm not them. Thank God Almighty. With him I speak face to face clearly and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. So it says, with Moses, God speaks face to face and clearly, not in riddles. Right? Remember, Proverbs says it's a book to help you understand the parables, the riddles, and sayings of the wise. So God with Moses, who is said to be a warrior, and he says that God is a warrior, right? In Deuteronomy 32, he talks about raising his flashing sword. He defends the Midianite women. He killed the Egyptian, okay, and so on and so forth. So Moses is superimposed on the idea of a great martial artist that God has set apart. See Exodus 15:3 again. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? Okay, so he says, I'm talking to this person clearly. He sees the martial art form of God. Okay, this is Numbers. This is after Exodus when Moses has said that the Lord is a warrior. He says he sees that God is a warrior, but you don't. You're kind of feeble Aaron, feeble Miriam. He says, there's a difference between him and you. He's a great warrior. You're just kind of scared little punks. So he says, why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? He's above you. The anger of the Lord burned against them, and he left them. When the cloud lifted from above the tent, Miriam's skin was leprous to skin disease. It became as white as snow. Aaron turned toward her and saw that she had a defiling skin disease. And he said to Moses, please, my Lord, I ask you not to hold against us the sin we have so foolishly committed. Do not let her be like a stillborn infant coming from its mother's womb with its flesh half eaten away. So Moses cried out to the Lord, please, God, heal her. The Lord said to Moses, if her father had spit in her face, would she not have been in disgrace for 7 days? Confine her outside the camp for 7 days. After that, she can be brought back. So Miriam was confined outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not move on until she was brought back. After that, the people left Hazarath, Hazarath, and encamped in the desert of Paran, which is a play on words for rape. Now, why is it a play on words for rape? Because this has to do with reproduction. Moses has a Cushite wife. Okay, God's reproductive cycle in this story involves a Cushite wife. Remember, the story is written by people like all these people in the world who want to say that they're chosen because of their tribe. They're like hyper-nationalist, tribalist people. They have their tribal propaganda. Religious stories, with almost no exception, are tribalist propaganda. Okay, especially the governing class of a tribe. It's part of witchcraft and social order and nonsense like that. Now, the reality of the situation is the Jews were never chosen by God to be leaders, right? To be chosen by God, you'd have to be a valid martial art leader. Okay, everything else is just something else. God chose the sun to do what the sun does, chose the lion and the leopard and the falcon. Okay, God didn't choose a mouse or a warthog to be the most noble thing and to lead people. God didn't choose Harry Potter. Okay, when you're a serious person, you look at the situation. If someone was to say God chose Harry Potter, you wouldn't believe him. If someone was to say that God chose a Jew that works out at the gym all the time, you wouldn't believe him. Or that chose a Jew who's like a 10th degree black belt in karate, you wouldn't believe him. For many reasons. One, these are very privileged people. The message that it sends, right? God sends messages through nature with multiple points of references. The message that it sends is injustice. After all the colonialism, all the lies, all the deceit, all the treachery, okay, they're then magically chosen? No, okay? And first and foremost, God expects you to think about it this way. That's how the Bible is written, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Torah, Tanakh, you name it. It's written in a way that tells you to use your head and use the scale of justice. Isaiah 28:17 is one of the most important scriptures. They usually go tail tucked around that time when I bring it up, and they're shivering under a blanket, they're whimpering, okay, they're sweating, they're turning pale, they turn leprous. They don't want to discuss it because it makes it clear that the measuring line and the plume line, the measure and the scales that God is using is righteousness and justice. Not, oh, this person said this and he did some kind of, magic trick and you should magically believe him. No, but righteousness and justice. And it's not right or just for the Jews to rule over the other people, for whites, for LGBT, for anyone but the Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order. But those people are the anti. What is the opposite of someone who deserves to be in charge, who's the top martial artist ever possible, who's from the most stigmatized people, the most exploited people, what have you? It's the most privileged people, right? The most unfair people. These feudal lord types, these neo-colonists, right? It's no, I'm not trying to insult them. These are the facts here, okay? And when people try to exalt themselves in the presence of the top martial artists ever possible, within earshot, in a way that, he's made aware, publicly, what have you, then he who is me and who is I, must chastise them for it and say, what are you thinking, you Harry Potter worm? You Prince Humperdinck, you Lex Luthor. That's what I'm supposed to do because it makes it crystal clear. Should I be vague? The word vague is a plum word for Av Jew. Or should I be clear? And so I don't mean that in a racist way, but it has to do with characteristics. Okay, I've been studying people for a long time. It's part of my top martial arts challenge that I made in 2013. Part of doing my due diligence for it was to study every group very carefully, to understand where they're coming from, to see their different types, to see their variations and spectrum. So when you look at it and you see that there's these people who are like, Rick Moranis, Adam Sandler, Bibi Netanyahu, Ben Bernanke, okay, Harry Potter, and these other people like Justin Bieber and Prince Harry and Prince William and King Charles and a young George Bush and this guy ran against him was John Kerry, I believe his name is. Okay, you look at the Republican types of the white forms, right? Ted Cruz, a typical pickup truck driver, Al Bundy. I say pickup truck, I meant that too. A typical big rig, truck driver. Okay. You see their forms. I went to many different high schools, lived in the most populated state in one of the most populated countries in the world. I studied their variations of types, studied their tactics, their thinking, okay, studied the limitations of their moral achievements, okay, which are few and far between because they're like always outside the divine order. So they were just mere rebels approaching morality instead of achieving moral excellence. And I saw the parable of the 10 minas, that God rewards people according to their deeds, okay, even before their flesh dies in various ways. I looked at the situation and it was crystal clear, and it is crystal clear. And they haven't had a viable counter-argument for many years. I've carried on TikTok and Facebook and I think it was Hulu or something, and they edited those videos badly. Even on Tinder, I weighed in. Plenty of fish, even on dating sites. Okay, Cupid, I weighed in. Okay, these people never have a viable counter. I had bumper stickers. I went way out of my way. It wouldn't be logical for God to say, well, you're supposed to just believe him. Why? You're not supposed to believe him. Okay, the Lord weighs the heart and the motives. That's what the Lord weighs. When the Lord looks at the situation, did you just blindly believe, the colonists with their book? Or did you look at it and look deeply into it? Just like the Pharisees and the Jews and the Gentiles in the Bible didn't understand what Christ was saying, okay? When he said, I'll rebuild the temple in 3 days, when, he was talking about the Spirit and he used the word water, when the disciples came up to him and said, why aren't you speaking plainly to people and so on and so forth? Okay, they don't understand the message of the Bible. Satan, who's said to be the God of this world, right? We see in Revelation, the Jews are really of the synagogue of Satan. Why? Because they're colonists. Okay, the cult of the emperor, right? The emperor and the emperor's deity. We saw it with Babylon in the story, Persia, Assyria, Egypt, the emperor and his deity, and his minions, his spies, his soldiers, his police officers, so to speak, all that stuff. That is the cult of the Antichrist, the people who are trying to exert authority over you. That's not the authority of God. And that's the colonist. That's Babylon's system. It's even called Babylon's system. Babylon was a powerful empire, okay? And they had global aspirations. They're the colonists, okay? The Babylonians became the Greeks and the Romans over time. Their deities went over there, and that's when they started trying to take over the world more. They went into Northern Europe, and they became the Northern Europeans. That's where the Ashkenazi Jews are from. Also down by the Roman Empire, close to the Roman Empire, or basically in the Roman Empire in Spain. They were the Sephardim Jews. Okay, and the Ethiopian Jews were very close to the Middle East and all these colonizing powers. Okay, they team up with Israel, this neo-colonialist nation in the modern day Israel, right? Because they kind of compromised themselves to the colonists, as the whole world did. But some people are given these cushy positions, and to the one who much is given, much is expected. Okay, when you're given much by the devil, much rebuke and punishment is expected.